The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Dry Creek's dusty Main Street as Miriam Avery pulled the schoolhouse door shut behind her. The familiar weight of her leather satchel, filled with primers and slate boards, tugged at her shoulder. She paused on the wooden steps, breathing in the sharp scent of sage that rode the October wind down from the hills. Miss Avery, young Timothy Doyle, came running, his boots kicking up small clouds of red dust. "Ma says to thank you for the extra lessons. Says I'm reading better than Pa now." Miriam smiled, adjusting her simple brown bonnet. "That's wonderful. Timothy, remember to practice your letters tonight." The boy nodded eagerly before racing off toward the cluster of miners' cabins on the town's eastern edge. Miriam watched him go, her heart warming despite the chill in the air. This was why she'd come west to bring learning to children who might otherwise grow up unable to read their own contracts or calculate their wages. Dry Creek sprawled between the Sage Hills and the sluggish Red Willow River, a town born of copper strikes and cattle drives. The buildings stood like tired soldiers along the Main Street McCarthy's General Store with its fading green paint, the Blessed Rest Saloon, Dr. Alma Rose Infirmary, and Sheriff Harlan Wicks's office with its barred windows. At the town's heart sat the water pumping station, its mechanical heartbeat echoing across the valley twice daily. As Miriam walked toward her small cottage behind the church, she noticed more "closed due to water shortage" signs than usual. The drought had stretched through summer into fall, and Silas Pike's water company had raised prices again last week. She'd heard the whispers at Sunday service, families choosing between water for drinking and water for washing, ranchers watching their cattle grow gaunt. "Miss Avery." The voice was smooth as oil on water. She turned to find Silas Pike himself standing outside the pumping station, his black suit pristine despite the dust that coated everything else in Dry Creek. He was a man of middle years, with silver threading through his carefully waxed mustache and eyes like chips of winter ice. "Mr. Pike," she inclined her head slightly, the minimum politeness required. "I trust you received my letter regarding the special arrangement for children of mining families." Miriam's jaw tightened. "I did, and my answer remains unchanged. The children will not be excused from school for extended periods to work in the mines. Education is not a luxury to be cast aside when times grow difficult." Pike's smile never wavered, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Times are indeed difficult, Miss Avery. Water is scarce. Debts are mounting. Surely you understand that families must make practical choices." "What I understand, Mr. Pike, is that ignorance is a chain heavier than any debt." She met his gaze steadily. "The children of Dry Creek will continue to receive their education as long as I draw breath." "How admirable." Pike touched the brim of his hat. "Though one wonders how long the town can afford such idealism. Good day, Miss Avery." He strode away, his boots clicking on the boardwalk with metronomic precision. Miriam watched him go, unease settling in her stomach like a stone. She'd crossed men like Pike before, back in Philadelphia. That confrontation had cost her her position and sent her fleeing west. But she'd learned something valuable from that experience. Men who viewed knowledge as a threat were men with something to hide. That evening, Miriam sat at her small kitchen table, grading compositions by lamplight. The students had written about their families, their dreams, their daily lives. Maria Santos wanted to be a nurse like Dr. Rowe. James Chen hoped to own a ranch someday. Little Sarah Turner simply wanted enough water to grow flowers like her grandmother had back east. A knock at the door interrupted her reading. She found Eli Turner on her doorstep, hat in hand. At 19, Eli was her oldest student, determined to complete his education despite the sneers of men who thought him too old for schooling. "Evening, Miss Avery. Sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know there's talk at the saloon. Pike's stirring up folks against you." "Come in, Eli." She stepped aside, noting the worry lines creasing his sun-weathered face. "What kind of talk?" Says you're filling heads with dangerous ideas, teaching things that got no place in a mining town. Eli shifted uncomfortably. He's got Harlan Wicks nodding along, and you know how folks listen to the sheriff. Miriam poured him a cup of coffee from the pot on her stove. What dangerous ideas that workers deserve fair wages, that water rights should be recorded and transparent, these are simple facts. Eli. Facts that don't sit well with men who profit from folks staying ignorant. Eli wrapped his hands around the warm cup. My ma wanted me to warn you. She's grateful for what you've done for us younger ones, teaching us to read and figure. But she's scared too. Pike holds the water rights, and he's not above using them. After Eli left, Miriam found herself unable to return to her grading. She'd included lessons on citizenship and workers' rights in her curriculum, carefully selected passages from newspapers and government documents. Nothing radical, simply the idea that every American had certain protections under the law. But in a town where one man controlled the water and another controlled the law, even basic truth became dangerous. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with a wind that cut through wool like paper. Miriam arrived at the schoolhouse early, as was her habit, to start the fire in the pot-bellied stove and warm the room before her students arrived. She stopped short at the sight of papers nailed to every post and building along Main Street. Her own name leaped out at her from the crude handbills. Warning: Miss Miriam Avery has been teaching seditious and immoral materials to the children of our town. She fills young minds with ideas that threaten the natural order. Good citizens should guard their children against such corruption. The words were unsigned, but she recognized the printer's mark, the same shop that produced Pike's water bills. By the time she reached the schoolhouse, a small crowd had gathered. Some parents clutched their children's hands tightly, eyes darting between Miriam and the sheriff, who leaned against a post with studied casualness. Miss Avery. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, worry etched in every line of her face. Is it true? Have you been teaching the children inappropriate things? I've been teaching them to read, write, and think, Miriam replied, keeping her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. I've shown them how to understand contracts so they won't be cheated, how to calculate interest so they can manage debts, how to read laws so they know their rights. Rights. Sheriff Wicks spat the word like it tasted sour. That's the problem right there, filling heads with notions that don't match reality. The reality, Sheriff, is that knowledge is every American's birthright. Miriam climbed the schoolhouse steps, turning to face the crowd. I will continue to teach any child who wishes to learn. Your sons and daughters deserve no less. She rang the school bell, its bronze voice carrying over the town. Some children broke free from their parents' grips and ran up the steps. Others were pulled away, their disappointed faces twisting Miriam's heart. Only 12 students attended class that day, less than half the usual number. But those 12 learned with fierce determination, as if sensing the preciousness of what might be taken from them. That afternoon, as Miriam dismissed her reduced class, she found Silas Pike waiting in the schoolroom. He'd let himself in, settled behind her desk like he owned it, which, she supposed, he did. The Pike family had donated the land for the school, a fact he never let anyone forget. Remarkable turnout today, he observed, running a finger along the edge of her gradebook. Though I expect it will dwindle further. What do you want, Mr. Pike? Simply to offer you a graceful exit. He withdrew an envelope from his coat. A train ticket to San Francisco, a letter of recommendation for a position at a private academy, and enough traveling money to make the journey comfortable. All you need do is announce that family obligations require your immediate departure. Miriam didn't touch the envelope. And if I refuse, then I'm afraid the town council will need to investigate certain irregularities in the school's financial records. His smile was sharp as broken glass. Money gone missing from the book fund. Such a shame when educators betray the trust placed in them. You're threatening to frame me for theft. Frame is such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as providing context for your departure." He stood, leaving the envelope on her desk. "You have until tomorrow evening to decide. I trust you'll make the wise choice." After he left, Miriam sank into her chair, mind racing. She'd kept meticulous records of every penny, but she knew how easy it would be for Pike to manufacture evidence. A altered ledger here, a forged receipt there, and her reputation would be destroyed. Again. That night, the wind howled like a living thing, rattling windows and tearing at roof shingles. Miriam sat by her fire, reading through her students' work one more time. Timothy's careful letters, Maria's improving paragraphs, Eli's thoughtful composition on the meaning of citizenship. She thought of her past, the Philadelphia school where she dared to question why the principal's brother received supply contracts at inflated prices. The humiliation of being marched out in front of students and parents, branded a troublemaker and worse. The long journey west, hoping to find a place where merit mattered more than connections. But running hadn't solved anything. Men like Pike existed everywhere, growing fat on others' desperation. If she fled now, what would happen to Timothy, Maria, Eli, and the others, who would teach them that their lives had worth beyond their usefulness to mine owners and water barons? The next morning, she arrived at school to find the book fund ledger missing from her desk. In its place lay a new ledger, identical to the old but filled with damning entries in a fair imitation of her handwriting. Payments to fictitious suppliers, withdrawals with no explanation, a pattern of embezzlement dating back months. The trap was set with professional skill. By noon, word would spread. By evening, the town council would meet. By tomorrow, she'd be lucky to leave Dry Creek with anything more than the clothes on her back. Miriam straightened her shoulders, smoothed her skirts, and rang the school bell. Whatever came next, she would face it standing. The children of Dry Creek deserved that much. As the bell's voice carried across the dusty street, she noticed a rider approaching from the direction of Twin Spurs Ranch. A stranger, by the look of him, leading a string of horses. He glanced toward the schoolhouse, and for a moment their eyes met across the distance. Then he touched his hat brim and continued on. Just another drifter passing through. Or so she thought. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the market square as the crowd gathered. Word had spread through Dry Creek like wildfire the schoolteacher was to answer for her crimes. Miriam stood in the center of the makeshift tribunal, her chin raised despite the hostile faces surrounding her. Silas Pike had orchestrated the scene with theatrical precision. A wooden platform hastily erected, the evidence displayed on a table for all to see, the doctored ledger, forged receipts, even a statement from a fictional supplier claiming unpaid debts. "Citizens of Dry Creek," Pike's voice rang out, smooth and righteous. "We gather here to address a grave betrayal. Miss Avery, entrusted with our children's education and our community's funds, has been stealing from the very students she claimed to serve." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Miriam saw Mrs. Doyle clutch her shawl tighter, confusion and disappointment warring on her weathered face. Sheriff Wicks stood to one side, hand resting on his pistol, though his eyes never quite met Miriam's. "These are lies," Miriam stated clearly, her teacher's voice carrying over the whispers. "Mr. Pike has manufactured this evidence because I refused to turn the schoolhouse into a recruitment center for child laborers." "She denies it," someone shouted from the back. "But the proof is right there." "Proof can be fabricated," Miriam replied. "Ask yourselves why this evidence appeared only after I refused Mr. Pike's demands. Ask why—" A clod of mud struck her shoulder, followed by another. Soon the air filled with debris dirt. Small stones, anything the crowd could grab. Miriam raised her arms to shield her face, tasting dust and humiliation. "Shame!" The voices grew louder. "Thief, corrupt woman!" Through the chaos, a new sound cut through the drumming of hooves on hard-packed earth. The crowd turned as a rider burst into the square, his horse sliding to a stop in a cloud of dust. The stranger from yesterday dismounted in one fluid motion. He was tall, lean in the way of men who lived in the saddle, with sun-darkened skin and black hair that touched his collar. His clothes were practical worn leather vest over a blue cotton shirt, canvas pants, and boots that had seen 1,000 miles. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, dark and steady, taking in the scene with quick intelligence. "What's happening here?" His voice was quiet but carried an edge that made people step back. Pike recovered first, his politician's smile sliding into place. "A matter of local justice. Stranger, best you move along." The man's gaze shifted to Miriam, taking in the mud on her dress, the ledger on display, the hostile crowd. Something flickered in his expression, recognition, perhaps, though not of her personally. "Doesn't look like justice to me." He walked forward with deliberate calm, the crowd parting before him. "Looks like a mob. Now see here." Sheriff Wicks started forward, but the stranger's hand moved to his hip, not touching the Colt revolver there, just reminding everyone of its presence. "Cole Redbird," the stranger said, his voice carrying clearly. "I train horses for ranches from here to the Rockies. And this woman—" He stopped directly in front of Miriam, then did something that stunned the crowd into silence. He removed his hat, a gesture of profound respect, and spoke with deliberate clarity. "She's mine. Anyone who lays a hand on my woman will answer to me. And anyone who calls my wife a thief had better have proof that would stand in a real court, not this kangaroo circus." The square erupted. Women gasped. Men muttered. And Silas Pike's face went through several interesting color changes. In the unwritten laws of the frontier, a man's claim of marriage, especially when backed by his reputation and his gun, carried significant weight. Miriam stood frozen, her mind racing. She'd never seen this man before yesterday's brief glance. Why would he? Cole turned to her, and she saw something in his eyes, a flash of understanding, of shared experience. He extended his hand, palm up, a question and an offer combined. "Ma'am," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "Sometimes the only way through a snake pit is together. Your choice." She looked at his outstretched hand, then at the crowd. Some confused, some angry, but none throwing anything now, whatever his reasons. This stranger had given her a shield. Pride warred with practicality for a heartbeat before she placed her hand in his. His fingers were calloused, but gentle as they closed around hers. "That's my good lady," he said louder, for the crowd's benefit. Then, with movements economical and sure, he shrugged out of his leather vest and draped it around her shoulders, covering the mud stains. "Sheriff," Cole addressed Wicks with cool politeness, "I believe we're done here, unless you'd like to explain to a federal judge why you're allowing mob justice in your town. The territorial governor takes a dim view of such things, I'm told." Wicks shifted uncomfortably. Federal oversight was the last thing any of them wanted, especially Pike with his water monopoly dancing on the edge of legality. "No crime's been proven," the sheriff muttered. "This was just a community discussion." "Glad to hear it." Cole's smile was sharp as a blade. "Then you won't mind if I escort my wife to somewhere more hospitable. Doctor, Rose Infirmary should do nicely." He guided Miriam through the crowd, his hand steady at her elbow. She could feel the weight of stares, hear the whispers starting already. "Did you see? Who is he? Married when?" They'd barely cleared the square when Pike's voice rang out. "This isn't over, Redbird! The woman is still—" Cole turned, and there was something dangerous in the motion, smooth and controlled like a mountain cat. "The woman is Mrs. Redbird to you, Pike. And if I hear you've been spreading lies about my wife, well..." He touched his hat brim in mock courtesy. "I've been known to take such things personally." He didn't wait for a response, just continued guiding Miriam down the street. She walked in a daze, acutely aware of his presence, the weight of his vest around her shoulders, the impossibility of what had just happened. Dr. Alma Rowe was waiting on her infirmary steps, medical bag in hand. The doctor was a woman in her 40s, steel gray hair pulled back severely, with clever eyes behind wire spectacles. "Saw the commotion from my window," she said briskly. "Come inside, both of you, quickly now." The infirmary was cool and clean, smelling of carbolic and herbs. "Doctor." Rowe locked the door behind them, then turned to study them both with medical frankness. "That was quite a performance. Mr. Redbird, Cole Redbird." He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "And it wasn't entirely a performance, ma'am." "Indeed, doctor." Rowe's eyebrows rose. "And what would you call it?" "The only decent thing to do." His gaze found Miriam. "I've seen this before. A woman of principle standing against men who'd grind her down for profit. My sister." He stopped, jaw tightening. "That's a story for another time. Point is, I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again." Miriam finally found her voice. "You don't even know me. What you've done, the claim you've made. Do you have any idea what you've bound yourself to?" "I know you're a teacher who won't let children be turned into mining equipment," Cole replied. "I know Pike's afraid enough of you to stage that circus out there, and I know what it's like to have the truth twisted into a noose around your neck." He met her eyes steadily. "That's enough for now. Doctor," Rowe cleared her throat. "Practical matters, if you please. The town now believes you're married. Pike will be looking for any crack in that story to exploit. Where will you live? How will you explain the sudden marriage? These details matter." Cole considered. "I've got a room at the boarding house, but that won't do now." "Is there?" "The old foreman's cottage out at the Garrett place." "Doctor," Rose suggested. "Been empty since Tom Garrett died. His widow's in Denver. Might rent it cheap. It's small but respectable, and far enough from town to avoid immediate scrutiny." "I have some savings," Miriam said quietly. "If we're to maintain this arrangement, I should contribute." Cole shook his head. "Your money stays yours. I've got enough from horse training to manage rent and supplies." He paused, seeming to realize the magnitude of what they were discussing. "That is, if you're willing to go along with this. I spoke without asking your permission, and for that I apologize." Miriam studied him, this stranger who'd thrown his lot in with hers based on principle alone. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that had nothing to do with the gun on his hip. "Why?" she asked simply. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the dusty street. "My sister Sarah was a teacher too, in Nebraska, small town, smaller mines. She spoke up about the mayor's son forcing his attentions on the young women in town. They didn't throw mud at her, they did worse. Found her by the river 2 days later." The words hung heavy in the air. "Doctor." Rowe made a small sound of sympathy, but Cole continued. "I was breaking horses 3 counties away. Got there too late to help her, too late to do anything but bury her." He turned back to Miriam. "When I saw you standing there today, facing them down with your chin up, I couldn't ride by again." Miriam felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry about your sister." "So am I." His voice was soft. "But maybe helping you is a way to honor her memory, if you'll let me." She made her decision then, looking at this man who disrupted his entire life for a principle. "All right, Mr. Redbird, we'll play this out, but we need to be clear about expectations and boundaries." "Of course." He nodded formally. "This is a business arrangement, for your protection. I'll not presume anything beyond that." Doctor, Rowe looked between them with shrewd assessment. "A business arrangement. Very well. But you'd better make it convincing. Pike's no fool, and he'll be watching for any sign of deception." A knock at the door interrupted them. "Doctor." Rowe peered through the curtain, then opened it to admit Eli Turner, hat in hand and worry creasing his brow. "Miss Avery, Mrs. Redbird. I mean, are you all right? The whole town's buzzing about what happened." "I'm fine. Eli, Thank you for checking. Miriam managed a smile. This is Mr. Redbird, my husband. The word felt strange on her tongue, but Eli just nodded, accepting it with the adaptability of youth. Pleased to meet you, sir. Ma'am. What about the school? Will you still be teaching? If they'll let me, Miriam said firmly. Education doesn't stop for the likes of Silas Pike. Cole stepped forward. The school stays open. Anyone has a problem with that, they can discuss it with me. He extended his hand to Eli. I hear you're one of Mrs. Redbird's prize students. She'll need allies in the coming days. Eli straightened, shaking Cole's hand with newfound determination. You can count on me, sir, and on my family. We don't forget who stood by us. After Eli left, the three of them sat down to plan. The cottage would need to be secured immediately. A plausible story for their marriage had to be crafted, and somehow they had to find a way to expose Pike's frame-up before he found another angle of attack. He won't give up. Dr. Rowe warned. Pike's got too much invested in controlling this town to let one teacher defy him. Then we'd better be ready. Cole said. He looked at Miriam, and she saw determination that matched her own. Partners. She nodded, sealing their unlikely alliance. Partners. Outside, the wind picked up, sending dust devils dancing down the empty street. Change was coming to Dry Creek, whether the town was ready or not. And at the center of it stood a teacher who refused to be silenced and a horseman who'd chosen to make her fight his own. The sun was setting by the time they emerged from the infirmary, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Walking beside Cole toward their uncertain future, Miriam allowed herself one moment of dark humor. You realize, she said, that you've just married the most troublesome woman in Dry Creek. His laugh was quiet but genuine. Ma'am, I train wild horses for a living. I'm used to trouble. Despite everything, Miriam found herself almost smiling. Perhaps, just perhaps, they stood a chance after all. The old Garrett cottage sat on a rise overlooking the Red Willow River, its weathered boards silver in the moonlight. Cole and Miriam had spent the past 3 days making it habitable, patching the roof, cleaning years of dust, and maintaining the careful fiction of their marriage for any watching eyes. Now, as dawn broke over Dry Creek, Cole saddled his horse for a different kind of mission. His years tracking wild herds had taught him to read signs others missed, and something about Pike's water operation didn't add up. You sure about this? Miriam asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. Pike's got to be moving water somehow, Cole replied, checking his saddlebags. The river's lower than it should be, even with the drought. Eli's been watching the pump station. Says they run the machinery at odd hours, middle of the night, sometimes. Eli Turner emerged from the barn where he'd spent the night keeping watch. The young man had become their most trusted ally, his loyalty to Miriam translating into a fierce determination to expose Pike's schemes. Saw Harlan Wicks heading up toward Pine Notch around midnight, Eli reported. Had 2 men with him, carrying surveying equipment. Cole exchanged a glance with Miriam. Pine Notch was a narrow canyon 5 miles upstream, federal land that should have been untouchable. I'll follow the river up. Cole decided. See what they're doing. You two keep documenting everything here, water levels, pump schedules, anything unusual. Miriam nodded, though worry creased her brow. Be careful. If Pike catches you snooping. I've tracked Apache war parties through rougher country than this, Cole said with a slight smile. Pike's men won't even know I'm there. He rode out as the sun painted the sage-covered hills gold. Following the red willow's meandering course upstream, his trained eye noted details, hoof prints from multiple horses, wagon ruts that seemed too deep for empty vehicles, and, most telling, sections of riverbank that had been recently disturbed. 2 hours later, he found what he was looking for. Hidden beneath a crude covering of branches and canvas was a pipe, nearly 2 feet in diameter, diverting water from the main channel. He followed it inland, moving carefully through the scrub brush, until he reached a sight that made him whistle low. A private reservoir, carved from a natural depression and reinforced with timber and stone. The stolen water glinted in the morning sun, enough to supply a small town or to control one through manufactured scarcity. Cole spent an hour sketching the setup in his notebook, marking locations and estimating volumes. This was bigger than simple greed. This was systematic theft of a public resource. Back at the cottage, Miriam had transformed the kitchen table into a research station. Papers covered every surface water bills, shipping records from McCarthy's store, correspondence she'd convinced sympathetic townspeople to share. "Look at this," she said as Cole entered. "Mrs. Doyle brought me her water bills from the past year. The rates triple during the exact weeks Pike claims the river is lowest, but Eli's observations show the pump running overtime during those same periods." Dr. Alma Rowe sat in the corner, having arrived with disturbing news of her own. "I've been reviewing my medical records. The doctor said the number of children with breathing ailments has increased dramatically since the Blackhorn mine expanded operations. Pike owns a significant stake in that mine. He's playing both ends." Cole realized, creating water scarcity to drive up prices while pushing families to send their children to work in unhealthy conditions to pay the bills. "It's worse than that," Miriam added. "I found this in the school board archives." She produced a document covered in legal language. "It's a proposed ordinance that would allow mine operators to employ children as young as 8 for educational apprenticeships. Guess who drafted it?" "Let me guess," Cole said darkly. "Our friend Mr. Pike." A knock at the door interrupted them. Miriam tensed, but Cole was already moving, hand near his gun. He peered through the curtain, then relaxed. "It's Mrs. McCarthy from the general store." The shopkeeper's wife entered carrying a basket of provisions, but her real cargo was information. "Thought you should know," she said without preamble. "Pike's placed a special order through my husband, enough barbed wire to fence off a significant water claim, being delivered next week. He's going to fence off the reservoir," Eli said. "Make it legal after the fact by claiming improvement rights." "Not if we expose him first," Miriam said firmly. She turned to Mrs. McCarthy. "We need more evidence. Would your husband be willing to share his shipping records?" Mrs. McCarthy hesitated. "Pike holds our mortgage." "What if I told you Pike's been cheating everyone in this town?" Cole asked quietly. "That the water shortage is manufactured, that he's banking on desperation to build his empire." The shopkeeper's wife straightened. "Then I'd say it's time someone stood up to him. I'll talk to Patrick. He's kept copies of everything man's a pack rat with paperwork." As evening approached, Cole and Miriam walked down to the river. The setting sun turned the water to molten gold, and for a moment they could pretend they were simply a married couple taking an evening stroll. "Tell me about her," Miriam said quietly. "Your sister." Cole picked up a smooth stone, skipping it across the water. "Sarah was like you in some ways. Couldn't abide injustice, always standing up for someone, the Mexican kids getting bullied, the Chinese railroad workers being cheated on wages." He smiled sadly. "She used to say education was the greatest rebellion against tyranny." "She sounds wonderful." "She was." Cole turned to face her. "That's why I couldn't let them do to you what they did to her. But I need you to understand something. Miriam, this arrangement, I don't expect anything from you beyond partnership against Pike. Your life is your own." Miriam studied his face in the fading light. "And if I wanted something more than partnership?" The question hung between them, delicate as spun glass. Cole stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and sage on his clothes. "Then I'd say we should take things slow," he said softly. "Build on truth, not pretense. You deserve that." She nodded, warmth spreading through her chest. "I haven't thanked you properly for that day in the square." "No thanks needed, though I should apologize for calling you my wife without permission." "Don't apologize," Miriam said. "It was brilliant. Actually, the one claim that would make them pause." She smiled wryly. "Though the irony isn't lost on me needing a man's protection to continue teaching independence." "The way I see it," Cole said, "you're protecting me too, giving me a purpose beyond drifting, making me part of something worthwhile." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Cole tensed, hand moving to his weapon, but relaxed when he recognized Eli leading two riders, a middle-aged couple on work-worn mounts. "Mr. and Mrs. Redbird," Eli called out. "These are the littles Nate and Soraya. They've got something you need to hear." The couple dismounted, the man holding a battered ledger. "We run a small spread west of town," Nate explained. "Been keeping our own records of water flow for years helps with grazing decisions." "Show them the maps, Nate," his wife urged. Nate opened the ledger, revealing hand-drawn charts. "See here 3 years ago. The river ran steady even in drought. Then Pike took over the water company, and things changed. The flow patterns don't match natural drought. We think he's been diverting water since he arrived," Saria added, "building that reservoir bit by bit, creating the shortage he profits from." Cole studied the maps with growing excitement. "This is exactly what we need, documented proof of the change in water patterns." "There's more," Nate said grimly. "My cousin works maintenance for the Army, says there's old military pipes from an abandoned fort that were supposed to be destroyed. Word is, Pike's been using them for his diversions." "Federal property," Miriam breathed. "If we can prove he's using government resources for private gain." "That's a federal crime," Cole finished. "The kind that brings marshals and judges Pike can't buy." They spent the next hour planning, pooling their information and resources. The Littles agreed to gather other ranchers who'd noticed the water discrepancies, misses. McCarthy would collect financial records showing Pike's suspicious purchases. Dr. Rowe would document the health impacts of the mine work. And at the center of it all, Miriam would use her greatest weapon, education. "I'll teach the children to keep water diaries," she decided. "Simple observations when they see the pump running. Water levels at different spots. Anything unusual. Pike won't suspect children's school assignments." "Turning the whole town into investigators," Cole said admiringly, "using their own eyes against him." As the meeting broke up and their allies departed, Cole and Miriam were left alone in the cottage. The weight of what they were attempting settled over them, challenging a man who controlled the town's water, its law enforcement, and much of its economy. "Are you afraid?" Miriam asked. "Cautious," Cole admitted. "Pike's dangerous when cornered, but we've got something he doesn't, people willing to stand together." Miriam moved to the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. "When I was a girl, my father told me that knowledge was like water. It finds its own level, seeps through the smallest cracks, and eventually wears down the hardest stone." Cole joined her at the window. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was a printer," she said. "Believed that spreading truth was a sacred calling. He'd have liked you, I think." "Because I protect his daughter." "Because you understand that some fights are worth having." She turned to face him. "Cole, whatever happens with Pike, I want you to know." He placed a gentle finger on her lips. "Save it for after, when we're not pretending anymore." She nodded, understanding. Whatever was growing between them deserved better than to bloom in the shadow of deception. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and the river continued its diminished flow. But in the cottage on the hill, two people who'd started as strangers were becoming something more, partners in truth, and perhaps, when the danger passed, partners in life. The next morning would bring new challenges. Pike would surely escalate once he realized the scope of their investigation. But tonight, they had each other, and the beginning of a case that could free Dry Creek from his stranglehold. "One more thing," Cole said as they prepared to retire to their separate rooms. "Tomorrow, I'll teach you to shoot. If things go bad, I want you able to defend yourself." Miriam nodded. The frontier was no place for the defenseless, and Pike had already shown he'd stop at nothing to protect his empire. But as she lay in her narrow bed, listening to Cole's steady movements in the next room, Miriam felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope, not just for justice, but for a future beyond this fight. A future where the makeshift marriage born of crisis might become something real and lasting. First, though, they had a water thief to expose and a town to save. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The barn stood at the edge of town like a weathered monument to better times, its tall doors thrown open to the afternoon heat. Inside, Silas Pike had orchestrated his version of frontier justice: hay bales arranged like courthouse benches, a makeshift platform at one end, and torches ready to be lit as evening approached. Miriam stood accused before a crowd that filled every corner of the space. Pike had been thorough in his preparations, producing witness after witness to speak against her. The fabricated ledger lay open on a table, damning in its careful forgeries. "Citizens of Dry Creek," Pike intoned from his self-appointed position as prosecutor, "we have before us evidence of the basest betrayal. A woman entrusted with our children's education who chose instead to line her own pockets." Sheriff Wick stepped forward, holding up a new piece of evidence, a deposit slip from a bank in Denver, showing a suspicious sum deposited under Miriam's name. "Found this in her desk at the schoolhouse," Wicks announced, though Cole noticed the sheriff's hands trembled slightly. "Dated last month, same amount as what's missing from the book fund." Miriam's sharp intake of breath was audible. This was a new fabrication, one she hadn't anticipated. But before she could speak, Cole's voice rang out from the back of the barn. "Interesting date on that deposit slip. Sheriff." He moved through the crowd with deliberate calm. "Seeing as my wife was with me in Cedar Ridge that entire week, visiting the Matterson Ranch about their horses. Got a signed contract to prove it, witnessed by Judge Matterson himself." It was a lie, of course, but delivered with such conviction that Pike's supporters hesitated. Cole had learned that in moments like these, confidence mattered more than truth, at least temporarily. Furthermore, Cole continued, reaching the platform, "I'd like to know how a deposit slip from Denver ended up in a desk in Dry Creek. Takes a week to get mail from there on a good day, yet this slip, supposedly deposited last month, looks remarkably fresh." He plucked the paper from Wicks's hand, examining it with exaggerated care. "In fact, this ink's so new it's still giving off fumes. Mrs. McCarthy, doesn't your store stock this particular type of ink?" The shopkeeper's wife, seated in the crowd, found her voice. "Why, yes, we just got a shipment this week. That's Brennan's premium black, can tell by the smell. Metallic-like." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Pike's face darkened, but he pressed on. "Technicalities and distractions. The fact remains." "The fact remains," Miriam interrupted, finding her courage, "that every piece of evidence against me appeared after I refused to sign your child labor agreements. The fact remains that you've manipulated this town's water supply for profit while claiming shortage." "Lies." Pike slammed his hand on the podium. "Sheriff, arrest her for slander as well as theft." But something had shifted in the barn. The crowd was no longer uniformly hostile. Doubt had crept in through the cracks of Pike's hastily constructed case. It was then that young Timothy Doyle did something unexpected. The boy stood up on his hay bale seat and called out in his clear child's voice, "Miss Miriam taught me to read. She gave me books from her own money when Ma couldn't afford them. She's no thief." "Sit down, boy," someone hissed, but other children began standing too. "She stayed late to help me with my sums," Maria Santos added. "Bought my lunch when Pa forgot to pack it," another child piped up. "Children's testimony means nothing," Pike snarled, but the damage was done. Mothers were looking at their children, remembering acts of kindness, questioning the narrative Pike had constructed. In his frustration, Pike made a crucial error. He grabbed an oil lamp from a nearby post. whether to bang it for attention or in genuine anger. No one could say, but the lamp was old. Its base cracked, and as he swung it, the oil sloshed out. It happened in seconds. The oil hit one of the torches, flames leaping like living things across the scattered hay. Someone screamed fire, and pandemonium erupted. Cole reacted instantly, grabbing Miriam and pulling her toward the side exit as smoke began to fill the barn. Around them, people pushed and shoved, all thought of the trial forgotten in the face of immediate danger. The children, Miriam tried to turn back, but Cole held firm. "Eli's got them," he said. And indeed, the young man was shepherding the school children out through another door, his face grim with determination. The barn went up like tinder, years of dried wood and hay creating an inferno that lit the evening sky. In the chaos, Cole noticed Sheriff Wicks grabbing someone not to help them escape, but to arrest them. Eli Turner struggled in the sheriff's grip. "He's taking Eli?" Miriam gasped. Cole's jaw tightened. "Get to the horses, now!" While Miriam ran for their mounts, Cole waded back into the crowd. He reached Wicks just as the sheriff was trying to drag Eli away from the burning building. "Let him go, Harlan!" Wicks turned, his face twisted with smoke and spite. "He's under arrest for inciting disorder. Saw him throw that torch myself." "Funny how you saw that when you were busy waving fake evidence around." Cole's hand rested on his gun. "Let him go." For a moment, the two men stood frozen, the fire roaring behind them. Then Wicks seemed to remember that his authority came from Pike, and Pike's authority was currently going up in flames along with his carefully staged trial. He released Eli with a shove. "This ain't over, Redbird." "No," Cole agreed. "It's just beginning." They regrouped at the Garrett cottage as the fire brigade worked to contain the barn fire before it could spread to neighboring buildings. Miriam paced the small kitchen, fury and fear warring on her face. "He'll charge Eli with arson," she said. "Pin the whole thing on him to deflect from his own failure." "Then we'd better move fast," Cole replied. He was cleaning his rifle with a methodical precision, preparing for whatever came next. Pike's shown his hand. He's getting desperate, which makes him dangerous. "Doctor," Rowe arrived with unsettling news. "Wicks has Eli locked up. Won't let me in to check on him. And Pike's called in favors. There are men riding in from the mining camps. Rough types." "He's building an army," Cole said grimly. A soft knock interrupted them. Cole answered with gun in hand, but lowered it when he saw who stood there. Pastor Preston Hale entered, looking haggard and carrying a worn Bible. "I've come to offer help," the pastor said quietly. "What happened tonight? It wasn't justice. It wasn't right." Miriam studied him suspiciously. "You've been silent while Pike ran roughshod over this town." "To my eternal shame, yes." Hale reached into his coat and withdrew a key. "This opens the back door of the jail. Wicks doesn't know I have it, gave it to me years ago in case of emergencies." He placed it on the table. "Getting that boy out seems like an emergency to me." Cole picked up the key, testing its weight. "Why now, preacher?" "Because I watched children stand up for what's right while I sat silent. Because I've let fear of Pike override my calling." Hale's voice grew stronger. "And because I've seen documents in Pike's office that would interest you. Plans to dam the river entirely. Create a private lake. He means to own every drop of water in this valley." The night deepened as they planned. Using the pastor's key, they would free Eli. But more than that, they would use the chaos of the fire's aftermath to gather the final evidence they needed. "I'll get Eli," Cole decided. "Miriam, you and the pastor hit Pike's office while everyone's distracted." "That's insane, Doctor," Rowe protested. "If you're caught—" "Then we're caught," Miriam said firmly. "But if we don't act now, Pike will regroup. He'll bring in those miners, intimidate everyone back into silence. This is our chance." As midnight approached, a fierce wind began to blow, sending dust devils dancing through the empty streets. Cole and Miriam stood in the cottage doorway, preparing to separate for their respective missions. "Be careful," she said softly. He touched her face gently, a gesture that sent warmth through her despite the cold wind. "You too. If something goes wrong, get out. Don't wait for me. We're partners. Remember, I don't abandon partners." Something shifted in his expression, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture somehow more intimate than any kiss could be. "When this is over," he murmured, "we need to talk about what's real and what's pretense." "Yes," she agreed. "We do." They separated into the wind-torn night. Cole made his way through back alleys toward the jail, while Miriam and the pastor headed for Pike's office in the water company building. The jail was dark, save for a single lamp in the front window. Cole circled to the back, key in hand. The door opened silently on well-oiled hinges the pastor had planned ahead. He found Eli in the single cell, sporting a black eye but otherwise intact. The young man's face lit up when he saw Cole. "Knew you'd come," Eli whispered. "Save the thanks for later," Cole replied, working the cell lock. "We need to move fast." They were almost to the back door when Sheriff Wicks emerged from the shadows, gun drawn. "Going somewhere?" "Redbird." Cole pushed Eli behind him. "Let us pass. Harlan, you know that boy didn't start that fire. What I know is that Pike pays my salary." But Wicks's gun hand wavered slightly. "What I know is that order needs to be maintained. Even false order, even if it means jailing innocent kids to protect a water thief." Wicks's face contorted. "You don't understand. Pike owns everything. Cross him and you lose more than your job. You lose—" "Your integrity," Cole suggested. "Your soul. Look at yourself. Harlan, is this the lawman you set out to be?" For a long moment, they stood frozen. Then, slowly, Wicks lowered his gun. "Get out, both of you. And if anyone asks, you overpowered me." Cole didn't question the gift. He grabbed Eli and they vanished into the night, leaving Wicks alone with his conscience. Meanwhile, Miriam and Pastor Hale had reached Pike's office. The building was deserted, everyone either fighting the barn fire or in their homes. Hale produced another key clearly. His crisis of conscience had been building for some time. Inside, by the light of a carefully shielded lantern, they found a treasure trove of incriminating documents, maps showing the illegal diversions, contracts for federal pipe, salvage, and most damning, correspondence with territorial officials outlining bribes paid to look the other way. "Take everything," Miriam whispered, filling a canvas bag with papers. "We'll sort it later." They were nearly finished when footsteps echoed in the hallway. Miriam doused the lantern as the door swung open. Pike stood silhouetted against the hallway light, and even in the dimness, his fury was palpable. "Thieves in the night," he said softly. "How poetic. And a pastor, no less. What would your congregation think? Hale?" "They'd think I finally found my courage," the pastor replied. Pike laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Courage, you've just signed your death warrant. Both of you." He pulled a derringer from his vest, the small gun gleaming dully. But before he could aim, a voice called from behind him. "Drop it, Pike." Cole stood in the doorway, rifle leveled. "Unless you want to explain to the federal marshals why you shot a woman and a preacher in your own office." Pike's face went through several expressions: rage, calculation, and finally, a terrible smile. "You think you've won. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I own this town. I own the water. I own—" "Nothing," Miriam interrupted, standing tall despite the gun pointed at her. "You own nothing but debt and lies, and those are about to be collected." The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Then, with a snarl, Pike lowered the derringer. "Get out, all of you, But this isn't over. Not by a long shot. They retreated carefully, Cole covering their exit. Once outside, they ran through the dusty streets as the wind howled around them. Behind them, Pike's roar of rage echoed like a wounded animal. Back at the cottage, they spread out the stolen documents. What they found exceeded their worst suspicions. Pike hadn't just diverted water, he'd created an entire shadow system, selling the town's own water back to it at inflated prices. The federal pipes weren't just salvaged. They'd been stolen from an active army depot. "This is enough to bring federal intervention," Pastor Hale breathed. "Prison time. Certainly. If we can get it to the right authorities." Cole cautioned, "Pike won't go down without a fight." As dawn broke over Dry Creek, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, their small group prepared for the battle to come. They had evidence, allies, and most importantly, the truth. But Pike had money, guns, and desperate men willing to use them. The real fight was just beginning, and in the wild frontier, justice often came at the barrel of a gun. Miriam looked at Cole across the table strewn with evidence of Pike's crimes. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty, she felt more alive than she had in years. Whatever came next, they would face it together, no longer pretending, but as true partners bound by something stronger than any manufactured marriage. The wind was rising with the sun, promising another day of dust and conflict, but also, perhaps, a day of reckoning for those who thought they could steal a town's lifeblood with impunity. The moon hung like a silver dollar over Pine Notch Canyon as Cole's group approached the hidden dam. They moved in silence, Cole and Miriam, Dr. Alma Rowe, Eli Turner, and 3 ranchers who'd lost too much to Pike's manufactured drought. Each carried provisions for documentation notebooks, measuring ropes, and a camera borrowed from a traveling photographer who'd passed through town last month. "There," Cole whispered, pointing to where wooden structures interrupted the natural flow of the canyon. Pike's dam was crude but effective logs and stones channeling water into massive holding tanks, with pipes leading off toward his private reservoir. "Mother of mercy," breathed Nate Little. "There's enough water here to irrigate every farm in the valley." Miriam was already sketching, her practiced teacher's hand capturing the scene in precise detail. "Look at the construction. Those are Army Corps markers on the pipes." "Dr." Rowe held up the camera. "We need photographs, evidence that can't be disputed." They worked quickly, aware that Pike's men patrolled regularly. Cole scaled the dam structure, calling down measurements while Eli recorded them. The stolen water gleamed in the moonlight, a fortune in liquid silver denied to the people who needed it most. "Cole," Miriam's urgent whisper made him look up. "Riders coming." The sound of hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls. Cole slid down from the dam as everyone scrambled for cover behind the massive rocks that littered the canyon floor. Sheriff Wicks led 4 men into the clearing, their torches casting dancing shadows on the canyon walls. "Check the equipment," he ordered. "Pike wants to know if anyone's been snooping around." Cole's hand found Miriam's in the darkness, squeezing gently. They were trapped between the riders and a sheer cliff face, with only boulders for cover, if Wicks's men searched thoroughly. But fate intervened in the form of nature. A mountain cat's scream echoed from the ridgeline above, primal and terrifying. The horses went wild, rearing and fighting their bits. "Cougar!" one of the men shouted. "Must be hunting!" Another scream, closer this time, sent the horses into full panic. Wicks fought to control his mount. "Fall back! We'll check tomorrow in daylight. No use getting killed by a cat." They retreated in disorder, leaving Cole's group pressed against the rocks, hearts hammering. Above them, the cougars screamed once more, or was it Cole caught Eli's eye and saw the young man grinning, hands cupped around his mouth. "Where'd you learn to do that, Doctor?" Rowe whispered. "Grew up near Lakota camps," Eli replied. "They taught me all kinds of useful things." They waited another hour before emerging, then quickly finished their documentation. The camera's flash powder illuminated the dam in stark detail, capturing evidence that would be hard to refute. The journey back proved treacherous. Wicks had left 2 men behind after all, and they opened fire as Cole's group descended the narrow trail. Bullets whined off rocks, sending chips flying. "This way." Cole led them off the main trail onto a deer path he'd noticed earlier. It was barely wide enough for single file, with a drop into darkness on one side. Behind them, their pursuers shouted and fired wildly. A bullet took Nate Little's hat clean off, and another grazed Dr. Rowe's medical bag. "Keep moving," Cole urged. "Don't stop." The path twisted between massive boulders, natural cover that saved their lives more than once. Miriam stumbled on loose rocks, and Cole caught her, pulling her against the cliff face as bullets sparked where she'd been standing. "Thanks," she gasped. "Thank me when we're safe," he replied, but his hand lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary. They reached a narrow ledge overlooking the river. Below, water rushed through a gauntlet of rocks. Behind them, torches bobbed as their pursuers closed in. "We're trapped," Saria Little said, her usual composure cracking. Cole studied the cliff face, his tracker's eye picking out details in the moonlight. "No, there's a way. See those handholds old Indian trail, but we'll have to go one at a time." "Are you insane, Doctor?" Rowe peered over the edge. "That's a 50-foot drop." "Death behind us or possible death below," Cole said grimly. "I know which I choose." He went first, testing each handhold, showing the others the route. Miriam followed without hesitation, her teacher's discipline serving her well as she carefully placed each hand and foot, one by one. The others followed. Dr. Rowe muttering prayers under her breath. They were halfway down when Wicks's men reached the ledge above. "They're climbing down. Shoot them!" But the angle was wrong. The cliff face protecting them from direct fire. Bullets sparked harmlessly off rocks as Cole's group continued their descent. Then disaster struck. Saria Little's foot slipped on a loose stone. She swung out into space, clinging by her fingertips as her husband cried out above her. Without thinking, Cole lunged sideways along the cliff, catching her wrist just as her grip failed. For a heart-stopping moment, they both hung by Cole's one-handed grip on the rocks, the river roaring below. "I've got you," he grunted, muscles straining. "Eli rope." Eli, who'd had the foresight to bring climbing rope, quickly fashioned a loop and lowered it. Together, they hauled Saria to safety on a wider ledge. Above, Wicks's voice carried down, "Forget it, we'll catch them in town. Pike wants them alive anyway for now." The rest of the descent passed in tense silence. When they finally reached the riverbank, everyone collapsed on the rocks, shaking with exhaustion and residual fear. "That was Dr." Rowe couldn't finish. "Tuesday in Dry Creek," Cole said dryly, earning a shaky laugh from the group. They followed the river back toward town, staying in the shadows. Dawn was breaking as they reached the Garrett cottage, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Inside, they spread out their evidence sketches, measurements, and most importantly, the photograph plates Dr. Rowe had protected throughout their escape. "This is it," Miriam said, studying the documented proof. "This is what we needed." "Now we just need to get it to someone who can act on it," Cole replied. "The circuit judge is due next week." "Pike will never let us last that long." Nate interrupted. "You heard Wicks. They want us alive for now. That'll change." A knock at the door made everyone freeze. Cole approached carefully, gun drawn. "Who is it?" "Pastor Hale. And I'm not alone." Cole opened the door to find the pastor accompanied by someone unexpected, Judge Walter Brennan from Cedar Ridge, a man known for his incorruptibility. "Judge Brennan!" Miriam stood, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Pastor Hale sent me an urgent telegram," the judge replied. his weathered face grave. "Something about water theft and federal crimes. I came as quickly as I could." His eyes took in their disheveled appearance. "I take it there's been trouble." They showed him everything: the documents from Pike's office, the evidence from the dam, witness testimonies carefully recorded. Judge Brennan's expression grew darker with each revelation. "This is worse than I thought," he said finally. "Pike hasn't just stolen water, he's violated federal law, interstate commerce regulations, and about a dozen territorial statutes. But, Cole prompted. But he's also got powerful friends. Taking him down will require more than just evidence. It'll require courage from this town, people willing to testify, knowing Pike might retaliate." "They'll testify," Miriam said firmly. "Once they know the truth, once they see there's hope, they'll stand up." The judge studied her. "You have great faith in people, Mrs. Redbird." "She has a way of bringing out the best in folks," Cole said quietly, and Miriam felt warmth bloom in her chest at the pride in his voice. "Very well," Judge Brennan decided. "I'll convene a federal inquiry tomorrow. Emergency session. But we'll need to keep Pike from running or destroying evidence." "Leave that to us," Cole said. "We've got friends too." They spent the day organizing. Word spread through whispers and careful meetings the judge was in town. Evidence had been gathered. Pike's theft would be exposed. By evening, the mood in Dry Creek had shifted from fear to anticipation. Pike, sensing the change, made his move. Riders appeared at strategic points around town, hired guns from the mining camps. Men with no stake in Dry Creek except their pay. "He's going to fight," Eli reported from his scouting position. "Got maybe 20 men. They're watching all the roads out of town." "He's not planning to run," Cole realized. "He's planning to ford up and dare us to take him." That night, unable to sleep, Miriam found Cole on the porch, cleaning his rifle by moonlight. She sat beside him, pulling her shawl tight against the cold wind. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Of dying, no. Done too much of it to fear it now." He set the rifle aside. "But I'm afraid of failing you, of letting Pike win because I wasn't smart enough or fast enough." She touched his hand. "You've already done more than I could have dreamed. Whatever happens tomorrow—" "Don't," he said softly. "Don't talk like that. We're going to win. And then we're going to have that conversation about what's real between us." "What if I don't want to wait?" The words surprised her, but she didn't take them back. Cole turned to her, his dark eyes intense in the moonlight. "Miriam, I know we started as a deception," she continued, "but somewhere along the way, it became true for me. The partnership, the trust, the feeling that I'd finally found someone who sees me as I am, not as they think I should be." He cupped her face gently. "You know that's exactly how I see you. Have since that day in the square when you stood there with your chin up, refusing to break. Then why are we waiting? Because you deserve a courtship without gunsmoke and threats. Because when I tell you I love you, I want it to be in peacetime, not when we might die tomorrow." "And if I said I love you now," she challenged, "in the middle of all this chaos?" His thumb stroked her cheek. "Then I'd say you're braver than any woman I've known. And that I love you too. Have for days now. Maybe since you first looked at me with trust instead of fear when I claimed you in that square." The wind died for a moment, leaving them in perfect stillness. Then Cole leaned down and kissed her, gentle and sure, a promise made without words. When they parted, Miriam rested her forehead against his. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm glad it was you who rode into that square, glad it was you who called me your bride." "And I'm glad you let me," he replied. "Now we just have to survive long enough to make it official." She laughed softly. "Always so practical." "Someone has to be. You're busy believing in people and changing the world." They sat together watching the stars wheel overhead, hands linked, drawing strength from each other for the battle to come. In a few hours, Pike would make his stand. The town would have to choose sides. Blood might flow in Dry Creek's dusty streets. But for now, they had a moment of peace, a declaration of love, and the knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it together. Not as pretend spouses, but as partners who'd chosen each other in the midst of fire and laid. The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of change. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning. Tonight, they had each other, and that was enough. The morning of the judgment arrived with an ominous dust storm building on the horizon. Judge Brennan had commandeered the town hall for his federal inquiry, but Silas Pike had other plans. He'd fortified the market square with wagons and armed men, turning it into his personal fortress. Miriam stood before the gathered townspeople, her students' water diaries spread across a table. Each child had documented dates, times, and water levels with the meticulous care she'd taught them. The evidence was damning in its innocence. Children's handwriting recording Pike's systematic theft. These observations, she explained to Judge Brennan, correspond exactly with the pump house operations Eli documented and the financial records Mrs. McCarthy provided. Pike's voice boomed across the square through a speaking trumpet. "This is illegal. A federal judge has no authority in territorial water disputes." Judge Brennan stepped onto the town hall porch. "Mr. Pike, you're commanded to appear before this inquiry to answer charges of theft of federal property, interstate fraud, and violation of water rights." "Come and get me," Pike shouted back. Behind his wagon barricades, 20 hired guns checked their weapons. The tension stretched taut. Then, from the crowd, Mrs. Doyle stepped forward, clutching her young son's hand. "I have something to say." "Ma'am, please stay back," Sheriff Wicks warned, but his heart wasn't in it. "No," she pulled free. "My husband died in Pike's mine because we couldn't afford the doctor. Couldn't afford it because all our money went to water bills, water that Pike was stealing." Her voice rose. "My boy deserves better than a town run by thieves." "Silence that woman," Pike roared. One of his men grabbed Mrs. Doyle roughly, and that's when everything exploded. Her son, young Timothy, bit the man's hand and darted away. The gunman cursed and gave chase, catching the boy by his collar. The sight of a child being manhandled snapped something in the crowd. These were parents, after all. And Pike had just crossed an unforgivable line. "Let him go," voices shouted. Cole had been positioned on the hotel roof with a rifle, watching for trouble. When he saw Timothy grabbed, he acted without hesitation. His shot knocked the gun from the man's hand, and Timothy broke free, running to his mother. "It's starting," Cole muttered, chambering another round. Pike, seeing his control slipping, made a desperate move. He grabbed Mrs. Doyle and Timothy, dragging them toward his wagon. "Everyone stays back, or they pay the price." The crowd recoiled, but Miriam stepped forward. "Using a woman and child as shields. Pike, is this the great man who controls Dry Creek?" "Shut up!" Pike waved a pistol wildly. "I made this town without my water company. You'd all have dried up and blown away." "Your water company?" Miriam's voice rang clear. "You mean the federal water you stole the river you dammed illegally?" She held up the photographic evidence. "The water that belongs to everyone, not just you." Behind Pike, movement caught her eye. Cole was descending from the roof, moving with the fluid grace of a hunter. But he wasn't alone. Sheriff Wicks was approaching from the other direction, and for once, his gun was pointed at Pike, not the townspeople. "This has gone far enough. Silas," Wicks called out. "Let them go!" Pike spun, keeping Mrs. Doyle between himself and the sheriff. "You work for me, Harlan." "Not anymore." Wicks' voice was steady. "I've done things I'm not proud of. Looked the other way too many times, but I won't be part of threatening women and children." "You're all against me." Pike's composure cracked completely. Fine, if I can't have this town, no one can, boys. Open fire. But his hired guns hesitated. Fighting townspeople was one thing. Opening fire with women and children in the crossfire was another. That moment of hesitation was all Cole needed. He moved like lightning, crossing the open ground in seconds. His shoulder hit Pike in the ribs, sending him sprawling and freeing Mrs. Doyle. She grabbed Timothy and ran as gunfire erupted around the square. The battle was chaotic but brief. Many of Pike's hired men, seeing the federal judge present and the sheriff switching sides, threw down their weapons. Others fled toward the desert. A few tried to fight, but found themselves facing not just Cole and Wicks, but armed townspeople who'd finally had enough. Cole and Pike grappled in the dust, the older man fighting with desperate fury. Pike managed to pull a knife, slashing at Cole's arm. But the horseman's years of handling wild animals had taught him to deal with unpredictable attacks. He caught Pike's wrist, twisted, and the knife went flying. "It's over, Pike," Cole said, pinning him down. "You don't understand," Pike gasped. "I saved this town before me. It was nothing. Before you, it was free," Miriam said, appearing beside them. She looked down at Pike with pity rather than anger. "And it will be again." As Wicks and other men hauled Pike away, Miriam knelt beside Cole, examining his bleeding arm. "You're hurt." "Had worse from unbroken mustangs," he said, but let her fuss over him. "Is it done, really done?" Judge Brennan approached, his face grave but satisfied. "Mister, Pike will face federal charges. The evidence you've gathered is overwhelming." He looked at the crowd gathering in the square. "But the real work starts now. This town needs to learn to govern itself again, fairly and transparently." That's when Miriam surprised everyone, including herself. She stood, faced the crowd, and called out, "Mister, Redbird isn't my husband." The square went silent. Cole started to rise, but she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "When Pike tried to destroy me with lies, this good man claimed me as his wife to protect my reputation. He risked everything for a stranger, asked nothing in return." She looked down at Cole, her eyes soft. "But I stand here now to say that while we may have started with a necessary deception, what I feel for him is the truest thing in my life." She turned back to the crowd. "I choose to call him my husband, not because I need his protection anymore, but because I want his partnership, because he sees me not as property or a problem to be solved, but as myself a teacher, a fighter for justice, a woman with her own mind and heart." Cole stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Miriam." "I'm not finished," she said with a small smile. "I've learned something these past weeks. Real partnership isn't about one person saving another. It's about standing together, each bringing our own strength." She took his hand. "So Cole Redbird, in front of this whole town, I'm asking, will you marry me? Really marry me, not for protection or pretense, but because we choose each other." The square held its breath. Cole pulled her close with his good arm, his voice husky with emotion. "Woman, you just stole all my pretty words. I had a whole speech planned for after this was over." "So that's a yes," she teased, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "That's a yes to today, tomorrow, and every day after," he confirmed. "You're right, we choose each other. And I choose you, Miriam Avery, my partner, my equal, my love." The crowd erupted in cheers. Even Judge Brennan smiled. "Well, I'm authorized to perform marriages. Shall we make it official?" But Miriam shook her head. After Pike's dealt with, after the water's flowing freely again, after my students are back in school, then we'll marry properly, with joy instead of necessity." Cole kissed her forehead. "Practical as always. One of the many things I love about you." The rest of the day passed in a blur of official proceedings. Pike's illegal dam was ordered destroyed immediately. The water company was placed under town control with a board of citizens to oversee it. Sheriff Wicks, in a surprising move, resigned his position and volunteered to testify against Pike in federal court. "I want to try to make amends," he told Cole privately. "Don't expect forgiveness, just the chance to do right." As sunset approached, the demolition crew reached Pike's Dam. The whole town gathered at vantage points to watch when the charges detonated and the stolen water burst free, rushing back to its natural channel. A cheer went up that could be heard for miles. Miriam stood with Cole on the hill overlooking the river, watching the water return to where it belonged. His arm was properly bandaged now, courtesy of Dr. Rowe, and Miriam leaned carefully against his good side. "We did it," she murmured. "You did it," he corrected. "You stood up first. You taught the children to observe and record. You never backed down." "We did it," she insisted. "Together." Below them, the red willow ran full again, its voice a song of freedom. Children played in the shallows while their parents planned irrigation schedules that would benefit everyone equally. The McCarthy store extended credit freely, knowing payment would come with the harvest. Dr. Rowe treated patients without demanding water rights as payment. "What now?" Cole asked. "Once I testify at Pike's trial, my horse contracts will take me away sometimes, but you'll come home," Miriam finished. "To me, to our life here. Maybe you can teach some of the older boys horse training, real skills, not mind slavery." "Our life," he repeated, savoring the words. "I like the sound of that." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they made their way back to town. The school bell rang out, not for classes, but in celebration. Tomorrow would bring challenges, rebuilding trust, establishing new systems, healing old wounds. But tonight, Dry Creek celebrated its freedom. At the jail, Pike sat in the cell that had held Eli Turner just days before. Judge Brennan had found his hidden cache of documents, including detailed plans to expand his water empire to neighboring towns. The scope of his ambitions had been staggering, but like all tyrannies built on lies and fear, it had crumbled when people found the courage to stand together. Miriam paused outside the jail, looking through the barred window at the man who'd tried to destroy her. "Come to gloat?" Pike asked bitterly. "No, to thank you." He looked up, startled. "If you hadn't pushed so hard, I might have remained just a schoolteacher. Now I know I can be more. We all know we can be more." She turned to go, then paused. "The children will learn about this in school, about what happens when one person tries to control what belongs to everyone. Your legacy will be a lesson in how not to lead." She rejoined Cole, leaving Pike to his thoughts and his fate. Together they walked through the celebrating town, greeting neighbors, accepting congratulations, planning for tomorrow. At the schoolhouse, they found a crowd of children with their parents. "Miss Miriam," young Maria Santos called out. "Will school start again tomorrow?" "Yes," Miriam promised. "And we have so much to learn, about water rights, about law, about standing up for what's right. And Mr. Cole's going to teach us about horses." "Right," Timothy Doyle added hopefully. Cole grinned. "If your parents agree and you keep up with your regular studies." As the evening wound down and families drifted home, Cole and Miriam stood alone in the schoolyard. The bell tower rose above them, a symbol of knowledge and now of freedom. "That proposal," Cole said, "it was supposed to be me doing the asking." "You protected me when I needed it," Miriam replied. "It seemed only fair I should be the one to make an honest man of you." He laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Fair enough, but I'm buying the ring." "Deal." They sealed it with a kiss as the last light faded from the western sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would face them as they had faced Pike together, honest and unafraid. The water flowed. The children would learn. And in Dry Creek, justice had found its voice in a teacher who refused to be silenced and a horseman who'd chosen to stand and fight. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and eternal, witness to all human struggles. But in this small corner of the frontier, freedom had won the day, and that was enough to give hope for all the tomorrows to come. The Red Willow River sang a different song now, fuller and freer, its voice carrying across the valley as life returned to Dry Creek. 3 weeks had passed since Pike's arrest, and the transformation was remarkable. Fields that had been dry as bones now showed the first green shoots of new crops. Children played in puddles without their mothers counting every drop. Miriam stood in her classroom, watching her students bent over their lessons. The room was fuller than ever. Parents who'd pulled their children out during Pike's reign now competed for seats. She'd even had to turn the storage room into a second classroom for the older students. Miss Miriam. Maria Santos raised her hand. Will you tell us again about the water diaries Papa says we helped save the town? You did more than help, Miriam replied, moving between the desks. You proved that ordinary people paying attention can reveal extraordinary truths. Every observation you recorded became evidence of justice. Through the window, she could see Cole working with Eli and several other young men in the field behind the school. He was teaching them to read horse behavior, skills that could lead to honest work instead of dangerous mine labor. His arm had healed well, leaving only a thin scar as reminder of the battle in the square. A knock at the door interrupted the lesson. Sheriff Tom Bradley entered the town's new lawman, elected by popular vote after Wicks's resignation. He was a former cavalry officer with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. Mrs. Redbird, he said, though the title still felt strange since they weren't truly married yet. Sorry to interrupt. There's been news from the territorial capital about Harlan Wicks. Miriam stepped into the hallway with him, concerned. Despite everything, she couldn't help but feel sympathy for the former sheriff who'd found his conscience at the 11th hour. What kind of news? He testified yesterday at Pike's trial, laid out everything: the bribes, the intimidation, even produced a second set of books Pike kept hidden. Bradley's expression was grave. Pike's looking at 20 years in federal prison, but Harlan... What happened to him? Judge offered him leniency for his cooperation. 2 years, with possibility of early release for good behavior. Harlan took it, said it was more mercy than he deserved. Miriam nodded slowly. Justice came in many forms, and sometimes redemption began with accepting consequences. After school, she found Cole grooming horses in the stable they'd built beside the cottage. It was a simple structure, but already 3 ranchers had brought horses for training, trusting Cole's reputation. Heard about Wicks, he said without looking up, his hands gentle on the mare's coat. Yes, I hope he finds peace. Man's gotta live with his choices, but at least he chose right in the end. Cole set down the brush, studying her. Something else on your mind? She smiled at how well he'd learned to read her. Doctor, Roe stopped by. She's organizing a town meeting tomorrow night. Says it's time to formalize the Water Compact written rules about usage and rights that everyone agrees to. Smart woman. And you're worried because... Because they want me to help write it. Me, a schoolteacher from Philadelphia. What do I know about water law? Cole pulled her into his arms, mindful of her clean dress against his work clothes. You know about fairness, about making sure the powerful can't abuse the weak. That's what law should be. She leaned into his warmth. When did you become so wise? Must be all that time around a certain teacher. He kissed the top of her head. You'll do fine. The town trusts you. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sage-covered hills in shades of purple and gold. The Littles had stopped by with fresh bread, the way neighbors did now that fear no longer ruled the town. Mrs. Doyle had brought preserves, her son Timothy proudly showing off his improved handwriting. It feels like a different place, Miriam observed. Same place, Cole corrected. Different spirit. You gave them permission to be their better selves. We gave them that. She insisted. I couldn't have done any of this alone. He was quiet for a moment, then stood and pulled her to her feet. Walk with me. They strolled down to the river as stars began to emerge. The cottonwoods whispered secrets to the evening breeze, and somewhere a nighthawk called. When they reached their favorite spot, a flat rock overlooking a gentle bend, Cole turned to face her. I've been thinking about what you said that day, about choosing each other. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small leather pouch. Went to Cedar Ridge last week, to the jeweler there. Miriam's breath caught as he opened the pouch, revealing a simple gold ring set with a small turquoise stone. It's not fancy, he continued, suddenly uncertain. But turquoise is supposed to bring protection and truth. Seemed fitting for us. Cole, she whispered. He dropped to one knee on the riverbank, his face serious in the starlight. You already asked me to marry you, and I said yes, but I figure you deserve to be asked proper-like too. Miriam Avery. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, real and true? No pretense, no necessity, except love. Tears blurred her vision as she pulled him to his feet. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, the turquoise catching the last light like a piece of captured sky. When he kissed her, she tasted promise and permanence, the solid foundation of a future built on truth. When? He asked when they finally parted. 2 weeks. That gives us time to plan something simple. Invite the people who matter. Nothing about you is simple, he teased. But 2 weeks sounds perfect. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A delegation from the neighboring town of Silver Springs arrived, led by their mayor, a portly man named Josiah Hartwell. We heard about what happened here, Hartwell explained as they gathered in the town hall. Pike had contracts with our water company too. Now that he's exposed, we're finding similar irregularities. You want our help, Doctor, Rowe said shrewdly. We want to learn from your experience, how to investigate, how to organize, how to stand up to corruption. Hartwell looked at Miriam. We especially hoped you might share your educational methods. Teaching children to observe and document, it's brilliant. Miriam exchanged glances with Cole. This was bigger than just Dry Creek now. I could visit, she offered, perhaps once a month, help establish programs. We'd pay, of course, Hartwell hastened to add, and provide accommodation. Other towns are interested too. Word is spreading about the Dry Creek model. The Dry Creek model? Miriam almost laughed at the grand name for what had simply been desperate people fighting for survival. But if their experience could help others, I'll consider it, she said, after my wedding. The meeting that night about the water compact was packed. Every family sent at least one representative. And the discussion was lively but civil. Miriam helped draft language that ensured water rights couldn't be consolidated by any one entity. That usage would be monitored by a citizen board, and that the river itself had rights that superseded commercial interests. This is revolutionary, murmured Samuel Chen, the banker, giving nature a legal standing. The Lakota have always known this, Cole said quietly. Water is life. Life can't be owned, only shared respectfully. The compact passed unanimously, signed by every household in a ceremony by the river. Pastor Hale blessed it, asking for wisdom in its implementation. Over the following days, wedding preparations merged with the ongoing transformation of Dry Creek, Mrs. McCarthy donated fabric for Miriam's dress, insisting it was payment for all the children Miriam had taught. The women of the town gathered for a sewing bee, creating something beautiful from their combined efforts. Cole, meanwhile, found himself cornered by the men with advice about marriage. Key is to always apologize first. Nate Little advised, even when you're right. Especially when you're right, added Samuel Chen. Don't listen to them, laughed Tom Bradley. Key is to marry a woman you respect as an equal, which you've already figured out. Cole agreed with the sheriff. His relationship with Miriam was unlike anything he'd known, a true partnership where both voices mattered. The school board met and formally offered Miriam a new contract with increased pay and an assistant teacher. They also approved her proposal for adult education classes in the evenings. "We need citizens who can read contracts and understand law," she argued. "Education isn't just for children." Eli Turner was the first to sign up, determined to complete the education he'd started. His bravery inspired others, and soon Miriam had a full roster of adult students. One evening, as wedding preparations reached their peak, a lone rider appeared at the cottage. Cole tensed, hand moving to his gun, but relaxed when he recognized the visitor. "Judge Brennan." Miriam greeted him. "What brings you back to Dry Creek?" The judge dismounted, his face showing both fatigue and satisfaction. "The trial's concluded. Pike got 25 years. His assets are being liquidated to pay restitution to the towns he defrauded." "And the water rights?" Cole asked. "Returned to the public trust, as they should be. The federal prosecutor cited your water compact as a model for other communities." Brennan smiled. "You've started something important here, which brings me to my other purpose. I'd be honored to officiate at your wedding, if you'll have me." Miriam beamed. "We'd be delighted." The night before the wedding, Cole found Miriam at the schoolhouse, preparing lessons for her substitute teacher. The moonlight through the windows cast everything in silver, making the familiar space seem almost magical. "Nervous?" he asked. "About marrying you, never." She set down her chalk. "About everything else we're trying to build here sometimes." He pulled her close. "We'll take it day by day. That's all anyone can do." "When did you know," she asked suddenly, "that this was real between us?" Cole considered. "The night of the fire, when you tried to go back for the children. You could have run, saved yourself, but your first thought was for them. That's when I knew I'd found someone worth keeping. For me, it was when you saved Harlan on the cliff. You could have let him fall, but you chose mercy. That's when I knew your strength came from goodness, not just skill." They stood together in the quiet schoolhouse, surrounded by small desks and big dreams. Tomorrow they would marry, truly and freely. But tonight was for remembering how far they'd come from a desperate deception to a love built on respect and shared purpose. "No regrets?" Cole asked softly. "Only one," Miriam admitted. "I wish your sister could be here. I think she'd be happy to see you settled with a troublesome schoolteacher." His arms tightened around her. "She'd have loved you, would have said I didn't deserve you, and she'd have been right." "Nonsense. We deserve each other, because we choose each other. Every day, we choose." As they walked home under the star-filled sky, Dry Creek slept peacefully around them. The river flowed strong and free. The crops grew green in irrigated fields. And in the morning, a teacher and a horseman would pledge their lives to each other before a community that had learned to stand together. The transformation wasn't complete. There would always be challenges. Always be those who sought to exploit rather than build. But the foundation was laid, strong and true as the love between two people who'd found each other in the midst of struggle and chosen to stay. Tomorrow would bring celebration. Tonight brought quiet joy and the promise of all the years to come. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the first hints of autumn coloring the cottonwoods along the Red Willow River. Miriam stood before the mirror in Dr. Alma Rowe's spare room, hardly recognizing herself in the cream-colored dress the town's women had created with such care. "You look radiant," Alma said, adjusting the simple veil made from Mrs. McCarthy's best lace, like a woman who's found her place in the world. "I never expected this," Miriam admitted. "When I came west, I was running from humiliation. I thought I'd teach quietly for a few years, maybe save enough to return east. Instead, you found a home, a purpose, and a man worth keeping." Alma smiled. "Life has a way of giving us what we need rather than what we plan. Outside, the whole town was transforming the riverside meadow into a wedding venue. Tables made from sawhorses and planks were covered with checkered cloths, wildflowers in mason jars serving as centerpieces. The children had strung paper lanterns between the trees, and someone had even managed to tune the old piano from the saloon well enough for music. Cole stood with Judge Brennan near a simple arch woven from willow branches and sage, trying not to fidget with his string tie. He wore his best shirt, the blue one Miriam said brought out his eyes, and new boots that still pinched slightly. "Nervous, son?" the judge asked with amusement. "Not about marrying her," Cole replied. "About doing right by her. She deserves more than a horse trainer with calloused hands and a wandering past. She deserves a man who sees her truly and stands beside her as an equal," Brennan corrected. "From what I've seen, that's exactly what she's getting." The guests gathered as the sun climbed higher. Ranchers and shopkeepers, miners and farmers, all united in celebration. Even some visitors from Silver Springs had come to witness the union that had grown from crisis into something beautiful. When the school bell rang, the same bell that had called children to learning and citizens to justice, everyone turned to watch Miriam walk down the makeshift aisle. Eli Turner escorted her, having volunteered for the honor with shy determination. Cole's breath caught as he saw her, not because of the dress or the veil, though she was beautiful. It was the expression on her face, joy mixed with certainty, the look of a woman who knew exactly where she belonged. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Judge Brennan spoke of partnership and purpose, of two streams joining to form a stronger river. When he asked for the rings, young Timothy Doyle proudly carried them forward on a cushion his mother had embroidered. "Cole," Miriam said, as she slipped the plain gold band onto his finger. "You gave me courage when I needed it most. You stood beside me, not in front of me. You saw my fight as worthy of your own effort. I promise to be your partner in all things, to stand beside you as you've stood beside me, in prosperity and adversity, in calm and storm." Cole's voice was rough with emotion as he placed the turquoise ring on her finger. "Miriam, you turned my drifting into purpose, my skills into service. You showed me that strength means lifting others up, not standing alone. I promise to support your dreams as my own, to be your shelter without being your cage, to love you with respect and wonder all my days. By the authority vested in me by the federal government and the territory of Colorado," Judge Brennan pronounced, "I declare you husband and wife in truth and law. What was begun in necessity is now sealed in love." When Cole kissed his bride, the cheer that went up could be heard clear to the mountains. Children threw flower petals with enthusiastic abandon, while the adults applauded the couple who'd helped save their town. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Dry Creek had seen. Tables groaned under the weight of everyone's contributions: roasted meats, fresh bread, pies made from the first fruits of newly irrigated orchards. Musicians appeared with fiddles and guitars, and soon couples were dancing on the packed earth as the sun traced its path across the sky. "Look at them," Miriam said to Cole as they took a break from dancing, watching their neighbors celebrate. 6 months ago, they were afraid to speak against injustice. Now they're planning the future together. "You did that," he said, pulling her close. "We did that," she corrected, as she always did. "And it's just the beginning." As evening approached, Pastor Hale called for attention. "Before our happy couple departs, the town council has an announcement." Tom Bradley stepped forward with a wooden sign. "We've decided to rename the schoolhouse. From now on, it'll be the Redbird Free School, in honor of both of you and what you've taught us about freedom through education." Miriam's eyes filled with tears as the crowd applauded. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep teaching our children to question, to observe, to stand up for what's right," someone called out. "Always," she promised. "That's what education is for." As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Cole and Miriam made their rounds, thanking everyone, They received gifts, both practical and heartfelt preserved foods, handmade quilts, a leather-bound journal from Dr. Rowe for recording your continuing adventures. Finally, as stars began to appear, they mounted Cole's horse. He'd trained it specially for 2 riders and set off for their honeymoon destination, a cabin in the mountains that overlooked the valley, lent by a grateful rancher whose children Miriam had taught. They stopped at the crest of the hill to look back at Dry Creek. Lanterns glowed in windows, and they could still hear music and laughter from the riverside. The red willow reflected moonlight as it flowed freely through the valley, no longer hoarded or controlled. "No regrets?" Cole asked, echoing his question from the night before. "None," Miriam assured him, leaning back against his chest. "This is home. You are home." They rode on into the star-filled night. 2 people who'd found each other in the midst of injustice and chosen to build something better together. Behind them, Dry Creek continued its celebration, a town reborn through courage, community, and the power of ordinary people standing together. The cabin was simple but cozy, with a fireplace already laid and provisions stocked by thoughtful friends. As Cole tended to the horse, Miriam stood on the small porch, breathing in the pine-scented mountain air. "It's so quiet," she said when he joined her. "Too quiet, we can go back." She silenced him with a kiss. "It's perfect. After all the noise and struggle, we've earned some peace." Inside, they built up the fire and settled on the rustic sofa, finally alone as truly married couple. The conversation meandered from memories of their unconventional courtship to dreams for the future. "I want to expand the school," Miriam said, tracing patterns on his hand. "Maybe bring in another teacher so we can offer more advanced classes. And your horse training program, we could make it a proper apprenticeship." Always thinking ahead, Cole murmured, kissing her hair. "What about children of our own?" She was quiet for a moment. "I'd like that. Little ones with your courage and my stubbornness." "Heaven help us," he laughed. "They'll be unstoppable." "Like their parents," she agreed. They talked until the fire burned low, planning and dreaming. The water compact would need enforcement. Other towns would need guidance. There would always be those who sought to exploit rather than build together. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, they were simply Cole and Miriam Redbird, beginning their true married life in a cabin overlooking the valley they'd helped to free. As they prepared for bed, Miriam paused by the window. Below, the lights of Dry Creek twinkled like earthbound stars. Somewhere down there, children slept peacefully in homes no longer threatened by manufactured drought. Farmers planned next season's crops, knowing water would flow fairly. The school bell waited to ring again, calling new minds to learn and grow. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Cole asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "For riding into that square, for claiming me when I was alone, for staying when you could have ridden on." "Thank you," he replied, "for letting me claim you, for showing me that drifting wasn't freedom, for giving me something worth fighting for." They stood together in the window, 2 souls who'd found their match in the harsh beauty of the frontier. Tomorrow would bring them back to Dry Creek in the work of building a just community. But tonight was theirs alone, sealed by promises made before friends and blessed by stars that had watched over the land since time began. The school bell would ring again. Children would learn to read and question and stand tall. Water would flow freely to all who needed it. And at the heart of it all, a teacher and a horseman would continue to choose each other, day after day, building a life and a community on foundations of truth, justice, and love. In the years to come, people would tell the story of how Dry Creek found its courage. They'd speak of the teacher who wouldn't be silenced and the horseman who wouldn't ride on. But mostly, they'd remember that ordinary people, standing together, could overcome any tyrant, any drought, any injustice. The candle burned low as Cole and Miriam finally retired. their wedding clothes carefully hung for the memories they represented. Outside, an owl called across the valley, and the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of rain. And in a cabin on a mountainside, two hearts beat as one. Proof that sometimes the greatest adventures begin when two people decide to stop running and start building together. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Friends, I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying this tale. Please share your location in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts about Cole and Miriam's journey. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to Wild West Night for more authentic frontier tales. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help more people discover these stories of courage, love, and justice in the Old West. Until next time, keep riding toward your own horizons.